Fellows, guests, colleagues and friends, welcome to the Academy of Social Science 2024 annual lecture. I'm Rita Gardner, the Academy's Chief Executive, and it's my very, very great pleasure to introduce Will Hutton, our speaker this evening. And of course, to introduce our Q&A host, who is Professor Richard Black, the Provost and Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Liverpool University, and recently who's become Honorary Secretary at the Academy, one of our trustees. As it's our 25th anniversary this year, you're very special because you're going to hear a few words about the Academy, which you've probably already heard before. So I hope you'll excuse me repeating some of the things you know, but not everyone in the audience is a fellow of the Academy. It's been that 25 years has been a period of sustained development for the Academy that places us actually now in a great position to champion the social sciences and the illuminating evidence and constructive challenge that they provide for the incoming government, amongst others. And that is a government we know and hope will listen to evidence. Our fellows are at the heart of all that we do, and many of you here are fellows of the Academy. Thank you. It's lovely to have amongst our audience this evening some of the very first fellows and leaders of the Academy when it was established 25 years ago. Now numbering 1,600 fellows, a tiny fraction of the professional and academic social scientists in the UK and beyond. Those fellows span the complete breadth of the social sciences and draw from academia, public, private and third sectors. Fellows are ever more involved in our work, and that is fantastic. You bring huge expertise, knowledge and networks into that work. Thank you, all of you. A glance at the Searchable Fellows database launched a couple of years back will demonstrate what an incredible resource our fellows actually are. Amazing leading research expertise and the application of that. It's a resource that's underpinned, for example, our recent campaign for social science project, termed Election 24, and that showcases a range of social science research evidence in 8 key policy areas, from health and welfare to sustainability and growth, aimed at improving public policy, society and lives. Now, the Academy grew out of a precursor body. It rolls off the tongue, the Association of Learning Societies in the Social Sciences, very memorable acronym, ALSIS. This was an alliance formed in the 1980s dedicated to promoting the social sciences as a sector in the UK. Today, we're unique among academies in having member learned societies, and now lots of them, 48 member learning societies covering most of them, all of the main disciplines, and many of the sub-disciplines in the social sciences. All 48 are independent social science organisations. They're part of our USP, our bedrock, and they're highly valued partners. Together, we have great strength, we have huge reach, and we're now really starting to capitalise on that collectively. And I'm looking at one of the CEOs in the audience tonight, and hopefully she's nodding at that point. The learning societies provide the disciplinary, if I can put it this way, yin to the Academy's sectoral yang. We work very well together. They are custodians of their disciplines and supporters of their communities, and especially their communities of early career scholars. They're a vital part of the HE system, and I personally think they need much greater recognition for the work that they do. Today, we're working increasingly closely together with our Learning Society members, for example, in the powerful collaboration between Learning Societies, us, and the ESRC in fostering EDI through a disciplinary and sector lens. And the third and final part of our bedrock as an academy over the 25 years, and is flourishing also more than ever, it's our ethos. We exist for the social sciences community as a whole. We span academia, public, private, and third sectors. We work with fellows and non-fellows. We work increasingly in partnership with sister organisations. And I'm delighted to see Susan Smith in the audience this evening. Congratulations, Susan, on your forthcoming appointment as President of the British Academy. In January, for example, and I'll give you 3 examples of how we're working in these ways. In January, in our first partnership with the British Academy, we jointly commissioned and published a major report on the shape of research impact, based on the REF 2021 impact case studies in arts, humanities and social sciences. 6 months ago, we commenced a new research and advocacy-led project to explore if and how the UK government's evidence infrastructure, including social science evidence, could be developed so as to deliver better outcomes for people. And thirdly, our We Society podcast series that I have to mention, led brilliantly by our President Will, is the Academy's first step in engaging wider public audiences. Today, we promote the social sciences on the front foot, demonstrating and advocating to governments, business, potential students and the publics what the social sciences are, what you gain from studying them, how they make a difference, and how symbiotic they are with STEM, medical sciences, arts and humanities in understanding our changing world. Finally, you may sigh gratefully, this brings me to Will and our speaker this evening. The development in recent years of the Academy's work and its profile under Will's presidency, together with the awesome challenges faced by the new government, gives one of the many contexts for Will's personal talk this evening on the topic of forging a we society, how the social sciences can shape Britain's future. It's a timely moment too, as we celebrate our milestone 25 years and he reaches the midpoint in his presidency. A president who brings immense profile and networks, thought and challenge, huge commitment, and a great willingness to do as well as to be the president. As you will also know, the topic of the lecture this evening is close to his heart and all that he stands for as a leading social scientist, as one of the most prominent commentators of his time, as the author of 2 best-selling books, both timed to political perfection. The State We're in 1995, and in April this year, this time, no mistakes. I will hand over to Will. I hope you feel we've celebrated 25 years, and if you knew it already, my apologies.
Well, welcome to everybody. Those of you who know me well, and there are quite a few of you in the audience, know that I don't normally write lectures out. I usually busk it with a few notes, but I'm afraid there's a number of pages here written carefully out, so every sentence has its proper weight. And thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming. 25 years of the Academy of Social Sciences. Anyway, here we go. 1979 and 1980 were fateful years. The twin elections, Lady Thatcher in Britain and Ronald Reagan in the United States, would bring the curtain down on the pre- and post-war social settlements in both countries. The relaunch of the economies and accompanying expression of social solidarities that had defined the American New Deal and Attlee's embrace of the welfare state and Keynesian economics were intellectually discarded by a resurgent new right. The new emphasis should not be on attempts to make the we live, the we society, through a social deal between the classes and between capital and labour engineered by a proactive state. The master of the new universe was to be the I. The state, accused of a natural proclivity to coercion, should be shrunk. Public direction of the economy should give way to the operation of private markets that could be relied upon to deliver the best outcomes, and only did not because of perverse incentives or always misconceived state regulation. Inflation will be conquered not by prices and incomes policies, but rather by controlling the supply of money, for which the precondition was a much reduced state. Organised labour was to be undermined, taxation reduced, public assets privatised, transfer payments to less well off that allegedly encouraged dependency curbed. Exit a we society, enter an I society in which individual agency Individual ambition, self-responsibility, and self-reliance were seen as means not only to economic prosperity, but social harmony and a moral order. Giving self-interest its free rein, after all, was only to recognise human nature. 45 years on, the failures are obvious. In Britain, the post-war settlement and union power did not need to be eliminated, they needed reform. It turns out that capitalism does not self-organise to best outcomes, as was promised, and that human nature is more multifaceted than simple injunctions to self-interest and the benefits of selfishness. We also want to express solidarities, mutuality, and fellowship. Britain reels from capital mistakes overlaid on capital mistakes, originating in trying to apply the philosophy, monetarism, the Big Bang and financial deregulation, austerity, Brexit, and the trust budget, with second-order mistakes, contractualising the NHS around market principles, not respecting the need for utilities, even in private ownership, to put the common good before profit, completes the baleful picture. In reality, capitalism needs guide rails, proactive management, and mechanisms to offload and share risk, whether for workforces or companies, offering workers voice and mechanisms of engagement in that organisations is good both for them and the organisation, together with a social floor, an income safety net, decent affordable housing, good public transport, access to health and social care, the chance to be properly educated and trained, to underwrite their lives and through which they don't fall when, for no fault of their own, the hazards of life overwhelm them. Capitalist firms have only limited appetite for risk. Without frameworks that share that risk with wider society, they tend to invest and innovate less, or they try to reduce risk by building monopolies or exploiting consumers and workers, or all three. Capitalism, far from producing successive equilibrium outcomes, veers from boom to slump, prolonged periods of stagnation, monopoly, and generates such inequalities that it threatens its own legitimacy. The claims of the new right intellectuals have been confounded. But that failure, and this is important, goes beyond the economy. The me society has begun to undermine not just economic growth, stability, and even damage economic dynamism, but wider structures and values. The innate human tendency to look out for each other still remains, but it's more qualified. Social psychologists observe that the rich tend to egotistical behaviours, crossing red traffic lights, for example, more, or not observing speed limits. But 45 years of being told that government is malevolent and collective action self-defeating has created all kinds of parallel malevolent cultural fallout, a growing distrust of vaccination, willingness to take children out of school in term times to go on holiday, tailgating and lane shifting on motorways. Worse, growing inequality, insecurity and stagnating living standards have imparted in all Western societies a fear of the other and not so much hostility but hatred of immigrants. They threaten to take away what little people at the bottom or near the bottom have. In this soil, right-wing populism grows. Make America, make Italy, make Austria, make Holland, make France, make Germany great again. It partly inspired Brexit. The leaning into social democratic values after the conflagration of World War II that underpin the institutions of the liberal global international order, openness to trade and respect for international trade rules, willingness to collaborate to contain the contagion effects of malfunctioning financial markets, the provenance of the World Health Organization, humanitarian aid, acceptance of universal human rights, including the rights of asylum seekers, the law of the sea and of space, are being gnawed away at. Mid-Western voters, British Brexiters, Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement pour la République, Germany's AfD, and others are all asserting the primacy of their nation and their superior identity over others. A new world of identitarian politics is being born, with anti-immigration and hatred of the foreign at its heart. We know where that movie has led in the past. Protectionism, international breakdown, forms of racism, and even war. So far, just enough of that old social settlement residual we is holding, along with acceptance of the value of an international order. But the trends everyone knows in the room are ominous. The argument of this lecture is that the we needs to be urgently reasserted to head off these dangers and relaunch growth, prosperity, and peace, and that social science has a critical role to play in that reassertion. But before I discuss how that can and should be done, a caution. I want to acknowledge that the right-wing counter-revolutionaries, as they like to be characterized themselves in the 1970s and 1980s, made some telling points. Market capitalism, private companies, private property, the pursuit of profit, and open markets alike offer a fecund system. Crucially, because liberal capitalism operates best as an open system, it cannot exclude the introduction of new ideas and the competition and structural challenge to incumbents that necessarily involves. The very plurality of companies means it has an embedded propensity to innovate and experiment at the technological frontier. And while it has no innate proclivity to arrive at any equilibrium, it does have a capacity to survive the failure of some ideas, even while others are pursued that work. Pluralism and the experimentation that accompanies it are two of liberal capitalism's great virtues. A third is that there can be no denying that every individual alive wants to exercise agency in their lives and to quest for the best for themselves and those they love. We want to exercise responsibility, express ambition, and to build a family, a career, a company, a charity, friendships and relationships. We want, as Aristotle once put it, to act on the world using whatever gifts the gods gave us to make it in some way better. That ultimately imparts purpose and happiness. We need to be free to pursue our own purpose and what we as individuals choose to value, and not be regimented or boxed into choices. Capitalism, in this sense, is congruent with important freedoms and prospers best when those are allowed. My conception of, an argument for, the we society assimilates those insights while standing its ground on the imperative of addressing capitalism's economic and social imperfections. Thus the concept of the we society, in which there is a floor below which no one can fall, informed by an ethic of fellowship, or if you prefer socialism, in which we mutually look out for each other, have each other's back, and collaborate in a spirit of mutuality. Equally, ladders of opportunity must be organised up which every individual exercising agency and drive for self-betterment and self-actualization is equipped to climb to live a life they have reason to value, to echo Amartya Sen. But crucially, this individualism is framed, whether of private individuals or firms, by recognition of obligations to the social whole, including the environment, and the whole reciprocally acknowledging obligations back. Individuals climb within a purposeful stakeholder capitalism, whose biases are organised to make profit optimization serve the common good, but preserving the plural runners and riders that drive innovation and experimentation. This is new or progressive liberalism. And everything is animated and made to happen by an agile, democratic, pro-investment, pro-social floor, pro-opportunity state. Capitalism will not deliver these results by itself, hence the need for public action. But I continue to argue, especially in the autumn of 2024, 100 years after Maynard Keynes opened his lifelong and successful, if only for a generation, assault on free market, lionizing individual thinking in his famous lecture, The End of Laissez-Faire, that attempts to claim that capitalism has self-organizing and self-regulating propensities are just plain wrong. As he said then, markets, however perfectly organized, cannot deal with the reality that there are inevitable uncertainties about the future, unknown unknowns, that are not capable of rational assessment, making market economies characterized by spells of too much hope and too much despair. Worse, there are huge differences in the speed and capacity of key markets, the market for labour, the market for savings, and the market for investment goods, to adjust to price signals, workers necessarily can only respond more slowly to price signals than financial markets. Consequently, the capitalist economy has no propensity to self-organize to best outcomes, nor does it have an innate propensity to invest in and innovate as much as society needs. Left to itself, it generates booms, busts, monopolies, and rank exploitation. As Keynes said 99 years and 11 months ago, the injunctions of free market laissez-faire thinking, which seemed to work in the unique conditions of Britain between 1750 and 1850, were not true for all times and places. But it's hardened into an ideology, a faith system, as he said, that allowed government, business, finance, and even the church to abdicate responsibilities for the welfare of the whole, falsely confident the invisible hand of the market will do the job on their behalf. In fact, it needs permanent, proactive management. Here we are, 100 years later, still making those, fighting the fight. Keynes was, of course, an economist, and as such, he was one of our most preeminent social scientists, following a tradition that had begun in the middle of the 18th century, when the Enlightenment was born and the turmoil of the Industrial Revolution was unleashed. Men and women pondered the source of the emergent strides in wealth creation. What truly created value? Was it human labour or the exchange in the market? What constituted the best form of governance? And existential questions about how we could come to know the world, because self-evidently what was happening was outside the provenance of the Bible and of faith. The great Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant urged his readers to cast aside the unthinking demand for faith that religion and monarchy deployed to justify their existence, but instead to dare to know and follow the logic of reason based on evidence. Earlier, the French political philosopher Montesquieu had been inspired by observing the operation of the then path-breaking British Constitution to argue for the division of government into a separation of powers, executive, legislative and judiciary, to combine action, legitimacy, consent of the government, and the independence of the rule of law. Thus could liberty and effective public action coexist within a rule of law society. Voltaire and Rousseau would, borrowing Kant's injunction to get beyond faith and monarchy, inspire both a demand for and study of democratic government. Adam Smith, father of economics, penned The Wealth of Nations, arguing that it was dividing tasks into ever smaller components in factories, but coordinated by the invisible hand of markets, that unleashed human productivity. Although in his theory of moral sentiments, which he wrote a few years before The Wealth of Nations, he had argued for elements of we society thinking. A good society, he said, was built on an obligation to get inside the heads of others, so promoting empathy and mutuality. Later, Auguste Comte, father of sociology, would argue that the scientific method is no less useful in understanding social dynamics. All were what we would now understand as social scientists, if early in our discipline, consumed with answering the same questions that beset us today, if in a very different context. How to create a good society, how to understand the process of wealth creation, how to order effective governance that commands the assent of citizens. It was a mindset that, driven by empirical knowledge, first unleashed the power of science to reveal the secrets of nature, which would drive forward the Industrial Revolution. But then it jumped across academic force fields as urbanization, industrialization progressed, bringing acute social and political ills in their wake. Society demanded a parallel, evidence-based approach to relieve the accompanying social and human distress. I always think one telling thing that you could smell Preston in 1840, 30 miles south. The conditions in British cities, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, were unbelievable. And so the social science tradition has grown, deepened and flourished, notwithstanding inevitable ebbs and flows. And economics has been the Marshallian, the Keynesian, Friedmanite revolutions. Societally, there have been successive interrogations into how to create stronger ties that bind us together fairly and diminish damaging inequalities. While politically, the perennial question is how to ensure good, responsive government, good law, and an engaged citizenry. But social science, the core of my argument, has made most impact when it plays into a we society zeitgeist. It's no accident that the birth of new liberalism in the last decades of the 19th century, arguing in philosophic terms that the individual had responsibilities to the whole and the whole reciprocally to the individual, absolute kind of challenge to kind of John Stuart Mill's liberalism, would trigger, with the impossible inequalities and social destitution that unalloyed capitalism had thrown up, political and social responses. Thus, Booth's and Roundtree's mapping of the geography and extent of inequality in London and York, finding shockingly that 30% of adults lived in abject poverty. Thus, the creation of the London School of Economics in 1890, and 2 decades later, Britain's first chair in sociology, occupied by Lionel Hobhouse. All would inform the thinking of the great reforming 1906-14 Liberal government, with its creation of a state pension, great extensions in education, compulsory health insurance, sick pay, health inspectors in schools, and the introduction of limited unemployment benefits. Then again came another surge of social science from the mid-1920s through the 1930s. In the wake of slump and mass unemployment, there had to be a better way. Led by the economists, notably John Maynard Keynes, but also Joan Robinson, Alfred Pigot, and the great social historian and apostle of the case for equality, R.H. Tawney. The Lever-Hewin Foundation, founded in 1925. Planning had to be included in any mix of policies better to order capitalism, hence the creation of the Political and Economic Planning think tank, PEP. Nuffield College was created in 1937, and the Nuffield Foundation in 1943, all carrying the virus of social science. The national government first, and after the 1935 election of the Tory government, were resolutely resistant to the ideas. But even the young Harold Macmillan would write The Middle Way in 1938, an insistence that if Britain was to avoid the twin evils of fascism and communism, it had proactively to manage capitalism so it worked for the common good. Keynesian economics, he declared, public ownership and a universal safety net were now minimum imperatives. The intellectual seeds were being sown for the Beveridge Report, the National Health Service, the Butler education reforms, extensive public ownership, and the commitment to manage the economy for full employment. After the 1939-45 war, Britain was not going to repeat the errors that were made after the First World War, promising a home fit for heroes, but delivering slump and mass unemployment. Again, the same interaction between social science and a we society zeitgeist was apparent in the 1950s, in particular in housing. This was the era of new towns, slum clearances, mass council house building. Indeed, council housing, building to provide working class families homes whose tenancy was secure at reasonable rents, is a quintessential expression of a we society. But the policy rolled out since 1980 to sell council houses built in those years at big discounts, with no attempt to replace what was sold, was a pure assertion of the transition to a me society. What counted was to confer today's incumbent social renters with gratuitous individual enrichment at the expense of future generations, to give one generation, at one moment in time, the capacity to be individualised at the expense of their successors. 4.4 million council houses have been sold since 1980, condemning those looking for homes today to internal waits or housing that consumes an average 2/5 of disposable incomes. Spool forward to 2024 and a new government pledged to national renewal, which the centrepiece is a commitment to economic growth and its 4 missions: driving to net zero, rejuvenating NHS, extending opportunity, and safer streets. There is again a we society zeitgeist abroad, concern about social fracture, concern about vast regional inequalities, indifference, sometimes terrible public services, recognition that it was as much a sense of desperation and futility that drove many people in left behind Britain to vote for Brexit, belief that privatisation has gone too far, we can't privatise obligations to ensure clean, affordable water, an insistence that Britain could be better governed, and dismay, even despair, at the lack of improvement in living standards because of poor productivity. The Conservative Party has not had so few MPs in the House of Commons since democratic politics began with the 1832 Reform Act. It may be the electorate is fickle, but as a fickleness born of a sense of being cornered, of looking for leadership and ways forward, resting on evidence and conviction that allows society better to have their backs. It's a moment for renewal and an opportunity and challenge to social science to step up to the plate as it has, and I've described, at past moments of national concern. I argue, and this time no mistakes, I had to remake Britain, I've got to give it a little plug, that in political philosophic terms, an ethic of socialism, or fellowship, or mutuality if you prefer, needs to be fused with progressive neoliberalism, putting aside old rivalries. More unites these credos than divides them, and they're so united to drive for a we society. The Liberal government of 1906 to 1914 was still too enthralled to laissez-faire for all its reforming zeal. Amazingly, a tribute to that, Asquith would resist both conscription and state direction of the armaments industry for the first 12 months of the First World War. It needed more state. The Labour government of 45 to 51, again for all its success, overdid the state and undercooked the need to revive British capitalism. Now the blend has to be got right. Durable mechanisms to create the social floor, the need to build ladders of opportunity that work for both the academic and vocational, repurposing our capitalism so it's a high investment and high innovation, and reconceptualizing both our democracy and our government. In terms of the tension between structuralist and individualistic interpretations of economic and social dynamics, social science will always lean into the structural, but it must leave space for the role of individual agency. Not only because that best reflects the reality of the we society, it's the best way to maximize support for what we do, both in civil society and from government. We need to redouble our efforts to put social science on the map. It's been right in terms of the 21st century economy to stress the importance of STEM subjects. Need that, the power of the knowledge economy of the 21st century. But wrong to allow them to crowd out the contribution of social science to economic prosperity and social well-being. A strong economy and a strong society are interdependent, and social science has insights into both that interdependency and the sources of their strength. There are amazing foundations of social science work on which to build. So here's a selection of examples I've culled from the Academy and Campaign for Social Sciences work, all on the websites. Election 24, Ideas for Change. We ran in the months up to the election. And of course, the We Society podcast, which Rita so kindly mentioned. And I've grouped the work within a We Society framework of floor, ladder, and repurposed capitalism to give you a better sense of social sciences' richness and how it plays into this agenda. So housing, part of the floor. So much. I think a roadmap to a coherent housing policy by Christine Whitehead, Tony Crook and Kath Scanlon gives a very clear-headed overview of the entire landscape, the necessity of planning reform to overhauling property taxation. And if you want some passion, do listen to the We Society podcast on the housing crisis with Oriel Miller and Vicky Spratt. Health. It's long been true that economic and social deprivation is a prime cause of ill health. Listen to the webinar with Professors Trish Greenhoff and Professor Metra Meyer in Election 24. It's uncompromising and very clear. Zoom in tighter, the Born in Bradford study, led by Professor Rosie McEachern, Director of Born in Bradford, highlights just how determined effort to put even small pockets of green space on social housing estates transforms health outcomes. And never to forget the enduring work of Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson. Social care. He must feel endless disappointments, but social scientist Andrew Dilnot restates the case for social care based on social insurance, again on the podcast. It's the only way forward. And a shout out, families, a shout out for the DCLG. I thought the white paper on levelling up was a great use of social science to support the case for actively reducing spatial inequality. And the evaluation it led of the Supporting Families programme, that's the largest ever undertaken, is a model of its type. It shows the dramatic improvement in everything from judicial sentences to time spent looking after kids. Social science needs Social science meets government, and what a successful outcome that was. Work. Will AI cause mass unemployment? No, according to Daniel Susskind. Handled proactively, intelligently, it will rather eliminate routine jobs and open up new possibilities. But again, that requires public initiative. And lastly, mental health. And here I must pay tribute to Professor Richard Layard's work on mental ill health as a prime cause of individual distress. Without him, Britain would not have the network of cognitive behavioural therapies. Then the ladders. Education. It's long been known that investment in early years has massive payoff. Sure Start was perhaps the last Labour government's greatest social innovation, but it's been slashed from 3,000 centres in 2010 to 1,000 now. The IFS's painstaking evaluation work, children who enjoyed Sure Start, access to Sure Start, on average got GCSE grades 0.8 points higher compared with the control group, proves the point. And as for higher education, Professor Chris Millward makes an evidence-based case for a standing commission on higher education to make regular recommendations on all the wicked issues, especially fees. I mentioned the DCLG white paper on levelling up, but I thought Janice Morfitz, she argues, and I think correctly, that alongside the 5 missions, the government should put place in redressing regional equality as a 6th. And I must give a shout out to Steve Machin and Leah Elliott-Major on social mobility. I think what do we know and what should we do about social mobility is remains the kind of basic text. It drives home how place determines destiny, how to those who hath shall be given, and the unjustifiable class divide over education and training. A degree for all who apply for one, while apprenticeships and FE funding is capped. A class divide in our education system that just can't be defended. And a few more words on the overall economic and social framework. I think, again, social science, for those of you who kind of have got the time, do look at Stagnation Nation. I think it was an outstanding piece of work. And I think the focus on lack of investment in both the public and the private sectors is so telling. And they point, as I've done for the last kind of 30 years, since they're at the state we're in, to the way the British ownership and investment system must be recast. And they also call for ironclad commitments to raise public investment, beginning with every parliament, by incoming governments. Taxation. We've got October the 30th coming up. I think the paper by Aaron Advani, Emma Chamberlain and Andy Summers on a wealth tax, which they one-off wealth tax. It's hard to kind of really argue against it, except, everyone knows the political obstacles. So they come back and kind of give a second option on how you might set about kind of designing a taxation of property, capital gains and inheritance. Again, that should be kind of on Rachel Reeves' desk. And net zero, however good the policy intent, bringing public opinion along with us is kind of an imperative. And I was quite struck by Steve Westlake and Caroline Verfuth kind of arguing that a frequent flyer tax would be a nice way of actually a nice rejoinder to kind of the voters in Hounslow, that actually it's only the kind of wealthy don't get away scot-free, and impositions on movement are imposed on kind of white van drivers. No, sorry, a frequent flyer tax is a riposte. Mariana Mazzucato has left her imprint, Mission Government. Hannah White's giving a lecture on reposing government for the campaign in, I think it's November the 18th next. So if you've got the kind of energy, come back for more. A second dose of Academy of Social Science kind of lecturing. But it fits in very neatly with the We Society framework. And lastly, it's not news for any of you that I'm a pro-European, but I did think that Sarah Hall, Cambridge's Sarah Hall, geographer, the way she's set about trying to kind of geographically map the impact of Brexit, very, very telling. And as she says, as she kind of finds, actually London has more or less shrugged off the impact of Brexit, with the second biggest service exporter in the world, and London is kind of at the kind of forefront of that. It's Britain's second-order cities who depend on back-office service sector work or subcontracting to EU supply chains, which are now migrating back to the EU, that are really being hurt, along with regions dependent on hard industries like chemistry, like chemicals. Brexit, in short, apart from lowering GDP below what it otherwise would have been, is making regional inequality worse, and particularly perverse, because most people have voted for it, even in those areas that have been so hardly hit. But that's enough, really, to kind of, I just thought it was important on the 25th anniversary to kind of give a shout out to some of the work and the way that it's kind of making an impact kind of on British economic and kind of societal thinking. And I wanted to dramatise just how extensive and good it is, and how comfortably social science fits in a We Society framework, which in turn cross-cuts with the government's 5 missions. That only is there the need and opportunity, we have a great base from which to launch. It's not all rosy. All the authors of the studies I've cited would say that more and better data would raise everyone's game, especially economic microdata on individuals and households where we are falling behind other countries. And I'd make another plea as an economist. We don't know enough about the drivers of productivity, the mainsprings of innovation, why some firms choose to grow into consequential companies and many who could choose not to. You can't have growth without more consequential high-tech companies in Britain, and we have hardly any. How best to disseminate basic research into business models, and what's the best relationship between public and private markets. Economically, I would say we're still flying, if not blind, and partially sighted. Time to redress that. And I also argue that for all the grid analysis and the broad recommendations that have been made in that research I cited, we need to push ourselves a bit more as social scientists, and to be supported in doing so, in thinking of innovative mechanisms actually to deliver what we propose. And for that, a reopening of the funding streams that used to fund thinking about social innovation we really, really welcome. But my big point stands. Britain is at an inflection point. It must change. Its economy must start growing again. Our social fissures must be closed. And we must recover the sense that the future can be better than today. As social scientists, we can take heart from what we've contributed and achieved in the past at moments like these. But we must redouble our efforts to do better. More compelling evidence, more workable innovation, more making sure that we think across our disciplines. That can be so powerful. And above all, have the ambition and determination to make ourselves heard. To turn a we society into reality would be a great prize, a roadblock to the growth of nihilist populism and the grave dangers at home and abroad it poses. An example to others of what can be achieved. And I would say that social science has a sacred duty to try and do what I've just outlined this evening. And be sure, we at the Academy will do our very best to help the cause. Thank you very much.